Introduction to CSS. In this chapter, we will give a brief introduction to CSS. We will link a style sheet to an HTML document and style some text elements. Topic to be covered. What is CSS? Styling the document. Linking a style sheet. What is CSS? CSS is short for cascading style sheets. It is the language used to describe the presentation of documents written in markup languages like HTML. CSS cannot be used without an HTML document. This means that to learn this language you need to know HTML to go through this course. Of course, this is just a courtesy, as unless you have learned HTML first, it is very unlikely that you would be trying to learn CSS. In the realm of web development, HTML and CSS are used to create the front end of a website. This is basically the view of the website, how it looks. We use JavaScript as well for designing the view. Many other languages are used when building websites. The back end of the website is developed by some kind of database query language and a scripting language that connects the front to the back. Web development is more than just designing the page, as you can see. However, CSS is very versatile. You will be surprised by what you can do using CSS, in an HTML document, of course. There are websites where you can compete with others to draw shapes using CSS. You can make animations using CSS. Albeit very rare, there are designers that use CSS to create their designs. To do all of this you need a good understanding of HTML. About the DOM, Flexbox and more. CSS also has access to frameworks. Frameworks are basically templates that make writing code a lot simpler. CSS has a framework called Bootstrap that gives you access to classes that divide the view of the web page into rows and columns. If you have done the HTML course, that is part of a bundle with this course, then you can think of this as a continuation. Styling the document first, we need a document to style. We will use the files we used for the previous course. We will start styling from scratch, which means the style sheet will be empty to start. The link to the files is given below. https://github.com/rattercoder/csscoursefiles. If you are acquainted with GitHub, then you can fork and clone the repository on your device. However, if you aren't, and I suggest doing this anyways, download the zip file. To do so, click on Code. Then the menu will drop down and you will see an option that says, Download zip, or something along those lines. Click on that to download the files, then extract it to a folder that you will use specifically to store the code in this course. The good thing about CSS is that you do not need to install anything. The browser can read HTML documents automatically. Thus you can get started writing the code immediately. Also, since you probably know how to write HTML code, then you likely have a text editor that you favor. I will be using VS Code, in case you are curious. Once you have downloaded and extracted the folder, you will notice that there is a folder called CSS. This folder will store all our style sheets. Both the HTML documents already have the style sheets linked, however, let us start with styling with the style tag. Open the index.html file in your text editor. Then open the file in a browser. To do so, right-click on the file and select Open With. Then choose the browser you want to use. In the browser, the page will look like this, Figure 1, Index.html page view. You can see that there is no styling on the page. Let's add some basic styles to the body and text elements. Inside the head element, we write this piece of code. First, we must understand how CSS works. CSS documents are read from top to down, so the code that comes later may override the code above. In CSS, we use selectors to choose the elements that we want to style. These selectors can range from elements themselves, elements within elements, classes and ID. After we choose our selector, we place third brackets or curly braces after it. Within these curly braces, we assign a value to a property of the selected elements. The property will depend on what kind of selector we are using. For example, it makes sense to change the size of the font or bold paragraph text. However, we generally do not give the paragraph itself borders. We might put the paragraph inside a div element and give the div element borders, as div elements are used to separate sections of a web page. To give an example, notice we selected the body element. In the body element, we assigned a value to the property called font family. After that, we choose the font family sans serif. The value of the property will depend on the property itself. We cannot assign a number value to a property like font family. Here the font sans serif will be applied to all text in the page. We use font family as there are some browsers or devices that may not have access to the default fonts. To make the view uniform for everyone, we specify the font family. However, we do not simply apply one, we also add fallbacks in case the device or browser does not have access to the font. Here we have chosen sans serif as this is a fairly common font. Next we have the H1 selector. This will style every H1 element in the page. This one is a bit more tricky and we will be changing some of the properties in a later chapter. For now, in order, we align the text to the center. Then we added a bottom border. We gave the bottom border a property of solid and colored it black. Then we padded the bottom of the element. Padding is space between the element and its borders. There is another property called margin. This is the space between the element and other elements. It is similar to padding, except padding increases the size of the element pushing away the border, while margin pushes away other elements surrounding it. Note that we can select H1 and body again afterwards. As CSS is read from top to bottom, the code is executed in the same manner. That means later code may actually override the code that you have written before. Say we select the body again after the H1 selector and set a different font family property. That is the one that will be applied, not what was read initially. This is why you should be careful when using selectors. You may actually select the elements that were previously styled by mistake, as selectors can be quite tricky. Linking a style sheet. Notice in the head element, the following line of code. This is how you link a style sheet to a HTML document. Now we could continue styling the page using the style tag. Or we could see that it is making our document longer than necessary and it would be more organized to have our CSS code in one file. You see, if we use style tags to style web pages, we would have to style every single web page independently. Instead, if we have them in a style sheet, we could link the code in one line and reuse the styles in multiple pages. First, open the folder, where you are storing the files. You will see a CSS folder. In that folder, there is a file called styles.css. Copy and paste everything inside the style tag from the index.html file to the styles.css file. Figure 2. Location of CSS folder. Figure 3. The style sheet in its natural domain. Figure 4. Code in styles.css. Now that we have the code in the style sheet, you can delete the style tag and everything inside it from the index.html file. Save all the files and open up index. HTML in a browser. You will notice that everything stayed the same. Summary. In this chapter, we learned about CSS, how a stylesheet is read, how to link stylesheets, how to style HTML documents using CSS,